Welcome back, folks. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be going over the Weapon Improviser archetype from the Advanced Player's Guide. It's genuinely one of my favorite archetypes in Pathfinder 2e right now, simply because of how fun it is, and I'm really looking forward to going over it with all of you. There is a pretty easy question that you can ask yourself to determine if you would be interested in playing a Weapon Improviser. Would you rather beat a wizard unconscious with a sword, or would you rather beat them unconscious with their own spellbook? If you're in the Cool Kids Club, the answer is obviously to beat them up with a book, and the Weapon Improviser makes you just as good with book-based violence as with sword-based violence. It's everything you could dream of. It is absolutely not a super powerful archetype, though, as in most situations, you will be as effective with a improvised weapon as you would be with a normal weapon. So you're not going to be particularly stronger, you can just use really interesting weapons and interact with your environment in a lot of fun ways. It's not a power gaming archetype, it's just really, really cool. Let's jump into it. Before we really get into the meat of the archetype itself, it's important to really understand what you're getting into if you're going to be using a lot of improvised weapons. They aren't all that complicated, but their usefulness does depend a lot on the GM and the environment you're in, as the GM determines how much damage each individual weapon will do and what traits they have. A simple way of doing this that is fairly impartial is to simply find a simple weapon that closely resembles whatever miscellaneous object you're currently using to try and brain someone. A branch that someone snaps off of a tree might be a staff, or it could be a long spear that does bludgeoning damage. It all depends on the spear and the environment of what you're trying to use it for. A stack of plates could function like throwing knives that deal bludgeoning damage. The world is your oyster, and yes, oysters can also serve as bludgeoning throwing knives in my opinion. While this is fine and dandy, any attacks that you make with improvised weapons do suffer a -2 penalty on attack rolls, as whatever you're using is generally not going to be intended for violence. Proper balancing of weapons is very important for their efficiency, both in the game and in real life. Also, improvised weapons count as simple weapons, so everyone but wizards are proficient in them. Thankfully, only plebeians who don't take the Weapon Improviser archetype have to deal with the penalty to attack rolls, and Weapon Improvisers get even better at accuracy. Let's get down to the business at hand, shall we? The Weapon Improviser dedication becomes available at level 2 and is really rather simple. It just removes the annoying -2 penalty on improvised weapon attack rolls, and lets you use your highest weapon proficiency for all attack rolls with your insane and weird weapons of choice. For some classes, like say a barbarian, your proficiency with simple weapons increases at the same time as all of your other weapons, so this doesn't impact you all that much. But this does mean for classes like fighters, which get faster weapon proficiency with particular weapon groups, that higher proficiency counts for all improvised weapons, even if those improvised weapons have nothing in common with their preferred weapon group. This dedication isn't all that crazy on its own, but it does enable you to do a lot of really crazy things. One of the main problems that anyone interested in branding a werewolf with a silver plate will run into is that improvised weapons don't improve as you level up. Pathfinder 2e is built with the expectation that martial characters will get runes on their weapons that increase their accuracy and damage. Unfortunately, this does mean that strikes with improvised weapons will fall behind more and more as both accuracy and damage increases as you get higher and higher in level. One easy way around this is if you're using the automatic bonus progression rules, as those increase all attacks that you make, regardless of whether or not you're using silverware or sensible weapons. If you aren't using that variant rule, though, you're a bit out of luck, as your effectiveness will fall off as you level up. That is, unless you take Improvised Pummel at level 4. For a single action, you can make a strike with a +1 item bonus on the attack roll, and you deal an additional weapon damage die of damage. So basically, your improvised weapon attack rolls become +1 striking weapons. If you get a critical hit, you do deal double damage, like normal, but you also do break the item that you're using. But this isn't really that bad of an issue. You can just pick up another miscellaneous item to continue to beat people into unconsciousness. The bonuses that you get increase as you level up at level 12 and 16. So at level 12 it's a +2 greater striking, and level 16 it's a +3 major striking. This means that your improvised weapons won't fall behind damage-wise, but you are going to be about 2 levels behind on a potency rune if you generally get them at the level where they become available. It's not that big of a deal, and it's definitely a small price to be able to do absurd amounts of damage with whatever you pick up, regardless of how effective it should be. Another point is that if you use an item that cannot be destroyed for whatever reason, if it's like an artifact or a cursed item that has a specific method to be destroyed, you cannot actually critically hit anything with that item using Improvised Pummel, because you can't break it, so you can't actually get a critical hit. Improvised Pummel is really, really wonderful, but it does limit you a little bit. As it is its own action, you can't use it to replace strikes if you're using a different feat or action that says you make a strike. As an example, you cannot use the power attack action with an Improvised Pummel, as Improvised Pummel is not a strike. This does make certain feats not work nearly as well with Improvised Weapons, but once again, it's a small price to pay for the fun factor. Besides, you can always, say, fine, I'll use all of my power, then switch to your actual weapon and then start kicking ass. At level 6, the Surprise Strike feat gives mechanical benefits that you've probably been RPing the entire time that you've had this archetype. The first time you attack someone with an improvised weapon, and they are not aware of how good you are with them, they're flat-footed since they don't defend themselves as well. No one expects the barbarian to be legitimately skilled with their bar stool in combat. This is obviously powerful, as flat-footed is a very nice condition for your enemies to have. Anyone with sneak attack will love this, and no one else is going to complain about it. It will probably only help on one strike every combat, but it is a lot of fun and it's very flavorful. Up until level 8, even if you critically hit someone with an improvised weapon, you don't gain any critical specialization effects, even if you would normally get them on your attacks. This changes with the Improvised Critical feat, which gives you a critical specialization effect depending on whatever wacky thing you're using to spread the pain around. Generally, the GM is recommended to pick whatever weapon group most accurately resembles the weapon that you're using, but it is fine to change it up some. A flower vase would probably work most similar to a club in combat, but in my opinion, I think that the knife critical specialization effect of applying bleed fits the best for a vase, as if it shatters, considering that you're using Improvised Pummel most likely, there's shattered glass everywhere, which would definitely cause some horrible bleeding. This is entirely up to GM interpretation, so I say just go what makes the most sense given the environment that the combat is taking place in. For most improvised weapons, you can't really go wrong with a particular weapon group, since most improvised weapons can realistically fall into multiple. Just go with what your gut feels. You're not gonna go wrong. You have probably asked yourself this question whenever I was going over Improvised Pummel. If my weapons break on a critical hit, won't I have to spend a lot of actions interacting to get new weapons? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes, mainly if you happen to roll high a lot, or if you're playing a fighter, because then you'll be getting a lot more crits. Thankfully, at level 8 you can rectify this issue with Makeshift Strike. It is a single action where you grab something nearby from your surroundings and use it as an improvised weapon, either making a strike or an improvised pummel as a part of the action. This functions pretty similar to Quick Draw, but it's specialized explicitly for improvised weapons. It might only save you 1 or 2 actions in a combat, but it does get a lot more useful as your accuracy and critical hit rate increases as you level up. You do have to get the item from chest height though, so you generally can't grab things off of the floor. I'd probably allow it if you were small or smaller size though, as in your chest is a lot closer to the floor, but really it's up to what your GM thinks you're allowed to get with this. At level 10, we finally reach the capstone for the Weapon Improviser, Shattering Strike. It is a reaction that triggers whenever you break your weapon while critically hitting with an improvised pummel. As this breaks the weapon, you can spend your reaction to break the weapon even harder to deal an additional 3d6 piercing damage to your target. This extra damage isn't doubled on a critical hit, but it's still a really nice boost on top of your normal critical hit damage. This makes breaking your weapon with Improvised Pummel into actually being better than critting with a normal weapon, as normal weapons don't deal an additional 3d6 piercing damage on top of their normal critical hit damage. This does make up a lot for not being able to have weapon property runes, as those generally will be able to add damage or other effects on a normal hit or a critical hit. It's a really nice way to improve your efficiency and damage dealing, especially if you really have to get someone out quickly. It does kind of suck that it uses up a reaction, but in dire situations where you need the extra damage, this can really save you. The Weapon Improviser is just a ton of fun. There is no denying that, but I do feel like how much fun you will have with it greatly depends on both you, the player, and the GM. On the player side of things, you have to be really adaptable in your thought process and strategy making. You won't always, say, have a one-handed improvised weapon available to you. Sometimes you'll have to make do with subpar weapons, and you won't always be able to, say, have the weapon traits that you want. It's a lot more fun if you accept that not everything is going to be going your way, and to just run with whatever stupid stuff comes to your mind without wanting it to be optimal. This is not an optimal damage-dealing archetype. It's just an archetype that focuses on being silly and having fun. On the GM side of things, you're going to have a lot of work populating the environment with interesting items that will probably be broken over someone's head. This is really vital because since while it's fun fighting with a random dinner platter that you grab, it's a lot more interesting to grab an engraved plaque off of the wall and then use that to attack someone with. Just interesting and unique items make for a much more engaging environment, and considering how much someone with a Weapon Improviser archetype is going to be interacting with the environment, it gets a lot more fun to be using this archetype if the environment is interesting. Also, as the GM, you're going to have to make some considerations depending on the particular character that takes this archetype. As an example, a rogue Weapon Improviser will want to get agile and finesse improvised weapons unless they're a ruffian, because they need those traits to deal sneak attack damage. Unfortunately, those are going to be a lot less common in improvised weapons due to their nature. But if your rogue can't get them, then they will have much less incentive to actually use their abilities from this archetype, which isn't fun for the player. So in that situation, I would be a little bit more lenient with your improvised weapons and let them get the traits that they want, but maybe decrease the damage dice. Also, if you have a monk Weapon Improviser with monastic weaponry feat, I would encourage you to be generous with giving the monk trait to improvised weapons. If you have any doubt, just watch a Jacky Chan movie, because that will tell you that literally anything that can be picked up can be used to flurry of blows. In total, I just love this archetype, and I wish that more people took it, because it makes for a much more engaging world, and it's also just a stupid amount of fun. Thanks for watching this. This has been a really fun video to make and draw, probably because it's such a fun archetype in the first place. If you want to get a second opinion on this archetype, the Deadly D8 channel has put out another video that is much better drawn than mine, with some really great examples. I feel like I've gone a bit more in depth than them, but still their video is fantastically produced and I can't recommend it enough. If you like what I've been doing, then you can leave a like or comment down below. It really does actually help get my videos recommended. If you want to see more of what I will be doing in the future, then feel free to subscribe. I'm currently working on a Swashbuckler guide, which will probably be split up into a couple of different parts so I don't give myself carpal tunnel making it, but the first part should be coming out in a week or two. I'll still be releasing at least one video every week, but until I see you next, live a wonderful life.